So today's webinar is in two parts. We decided to focus on both writing and speaking. I'm going to talk to you about the writing paper, and then Kate will talk to you about the speaking paper. So Kate would like to go first, if that's better.
Well, can everybody hear you now? I think so.
Yes, we can hear Jacopo.
Okay,
so
because he's got an introduction.
Right.
Okay, so false alarm, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to go first. Okay, so just to ensure we're all on the same page today, okay? Everyone is supposed to know what the IELTS exam is. IELTS is an acronym, International English Language Testing System, and it's an exam which assesses the English language proficiency of people who want to study or work in an English-speaking environment. It's the world's most popular high-stakes English language test. Last year, more than 3.5 million tests taken all over the world. Today, we're going to talk about the IELTS Academic test, so not the general training one, which is particularly suitable for students who are willing to study in an English-speaking environment.
Jacopo, there's still the lag in the video, as well as there's some disturbance in the audio.
Okay, Jacopo and Kate, do you want to switch off your videos and keep only your audio on?
Okay,
maybe that will help.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
And I request all the participants to please switch off your videos, because that sometimes adds to the load.
How's that?
Okay, Jacopo, maybe you can start again.
Of course. So, sorry for this. I'll start again now. Okay. So what I was saying is, just to ensure that we are all on the same page, everyone knows what the IELTS exam is, okay? IELTS is an acronym, and it stands for International English Language Testing System. It's an exam which assesses the English language proficiency of people who want to study or work in English-speaking environments. Just to confirm, today we're going to talk about the IELTS academic exam, so not the general training one. Each of the exams contains 4 sections: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Today, we're going to focus on the writing and the speaking component. So let's go on. As far as the writing paper is concerned, as you can see in this slide, we all know that it consists of 2 tasks, task 1 and task 2. It's 60 minutes in length, and you should assign 20 minutes to writing about the task present in the first part, and 40 minutes to the task present in task 2. It lasts for 1 hour, and you are advised to write in pen or pencil your answer on a separate answer sheet. What you must keep in mind is that for the writing paper, the most important thing is that you have to write your answers in a formal style. We'll come back to this point in a moment. So, this is a summing up slide on task 1. So you should write 150 words in a neutral or semi-formal style, and you should spend about 20 minutes on task 1. Let's look at an example question of writing task 1. As you can see, this is a sample task taken from our upcoming series of practice test books with Oxford University Press India called Perfect IELTS. Look at this task. You will see that it is 2 graphs that compare the origins of immigrants to Canada in 2 different years, 1971 and 2011. So that's how the answer to this task should begin. You need to open your answer to this question with a clear overview of what the data represents. So no analysis at this initial stage, just what it is. So if we take a look at how the task is started on the student's example on next slide, we can see that the first 2 sentences here have covered this. Shamila, this candidate, said and started to talk about the 1971 results first. So the first paragraph is an overview of the data. And a good way of showing that you are consciously writing an overview in this first paragraph is to use a signpost. So you should begin your summarizing sentence with an expression like as an overview or overall or the general trend is. So you just say what the data is. Let's read here. Sharmila said, the pie charts show the continents of origin of the foreign-born population of Canada in 1971 and then in 2011. The origins of this population have changed vastly over the last 40 years. This is the introduction to the writing. After that, you go into more detail in the next paragraph. You may also decide to organize 3 or 4 paragraphs for task 1 in total. You should remember that in this task, you're not asked to write an essay, but a more report-like task. You don't need a formal introduction or conclusion, but what you need to do is to examine in great detail, using a variety of comparative forms, what's contained in the task. For example, you could use a lot of formal language, such as higher than, lower than, hotter than, colder than, and you could also use comparative sentences with as. For example, you could say something like, by 2011, European immigration isn't as high as it was in 1971. You're also advised to use descriptive words, such as rise, fall, drop. So not just go up and go down when you talk about data. I can see here that Shamila used the verb plummeted. That's excellent. Not only should you be using these verbs, but you should also try to use as many adverbs as possible. For example, rose slowly or dropped dramatically, picked quickly, etc. It's also important that you give numbers that are in the chart, because examiners want to see figures, percentages represented in your writing. I can also see in this example that the 4th paragraph does contain an opinion. It is possible that all the continental groups had risen in number, with the total growth of the Canadian population over the 40-year period. Being honest, this piece of writing could have ended at the end of paragraph 3, because here it's already about 200 words. Since in this task, you're not asked to insert personal opinions, you could just finalize a piece of writing when you have analyzed all the data contained in the graphs. The important thing for this task is that the writing needs to keep being very formal. So you should think, when preparing task 1, that you're writing something, say, for example, for a government department. Use also some fancy linkers, such as a result of, or due to, etc. Remember, the conclusion does not have to be a long and big paragraph. You're just advised to finish the sentence, to finish your paragraph with a sentence that sums up all your report. Let's now take a look at what's contained in task 2. Task 2 is an essay. Remember that in this task, you are expected to develop your argument. And you're also expected to use complex language while doing it. Let's look at this sample task 2. Again, this task comes from Perfect IELTS, our upcoming series of practice test books with Oxford University Press India. In the interests of safety, bicycles should not be allowed on roads. To what extent do you agree or disagree? Note this, to what extent. You know what this means? This means that you can basically sit on a fence a bit, if you like, with arguments on both sides. However, this means you need to cover all your arguments, so you need to write a lot. So as you have little time to do this, it's better to have just one point of view in this task. So you go one way or another. You agree or disagree. Don't worry about what the examiner may think. So you agree or not with your view. Frankly, they don't care about what your opinions are. The important thing is how you write them. Speaking of the examiner, if you are going to do a paper-based exam, it's important that your handwriting is very, very legible. And I'll tell you why. Imagine you're an examiner and you've just received from Cambridge a bag containing 100 papers you have to mark. Suddenly, you mark the first 50 papers. It's deep into the night, and you come across a very difficult to read paper. How do you think you will mark this paper? Handwriting is part of the communication. If you're doing a computer-based exam, then you don't have this problem because you'll just have to type your answers in a box. But if you're doing a paper-based exam, please remember to keep your handwriting clear. Anyway, you all know how to organize an essay. You have an introductory paragraph, then 2 or 3 paragraphs that make up the body of the essay, and then a conclusion. Always make sure that the first sentence is useful to make your stance clear from the very beginning, as done in this example. Let's read together what this candidate, Malika, writes here. I strongly disagree with the statement that bicycles should not be allowed on roads. The level of formality here is extremely high. And again, we have to say that you should think of writing a text as if you were a university lecturer giving a lecture. Another important thing is that writing an enormously long essay will not get you higher marks. And also, an examiner marking an extremely long essay by candlelight at 3 o'clock in the morning won't thank you either. So it's better to write 250 words and give yourself an extra minute at the end to check spelling and obvious errors. Another important thing is that to get a 7, you need to have virtually no errors. Think that it's amazing how many people put extra articles in front of abstract nouns. For example, they say, the nature is, even if they are high-level candidates. Try to avoid doing these mistakes. Another thing is that you consider the time limit So it's not worthwhile giving a big and long list of points which you don't have time to elaborate on. It's better to talk about 2 points and then go into them in great detail, showing off all what we call the grammatical acrobatics. Let's get to them now, okay? So, a good thing for you to do is always to remember to use this part, second and third conditionals. So rather than just saying stuff like, when I woke up, say something like, it must have been 10 o'clock when I woke up. You're saying exactly the same thing, but in a different way. And the second way is much more effective. Try to use also phrasal verbs which are not too informal, to give a variety of adjectives and adverbs. If you want to get a score of 7 or more, the examiner needs to be convinced that you deserve that. Let's take a look at this example and see why Malika did so well in this task. So we said that the first sentence has her disagreeing with the statement and makes her position very clear. I strongly disagree with the statement that bicycles should not be allowed on roads. The next sentence, she has already jumped into a fantastic second conditional, even using the verb to be correctly. Look at this. If the bicycle were invented today, this is lovely. And then the next sentence starts with thinker. However, the argument that bicycles should not be allowed. And then again, this sentence slides into an as comparison, as ridiculous as. And then again, another linker and another conditional, if you think about it. And to conclude, another comparison. 50 years longer anyway. This is all just in one sentence. This is Olympic level mastery of sentence construction. And this is the reason why this candidate got an 8. And in the second paragraph, Malika gives a personal example, which is what is asked in the question. She says, as a cyclist myself, etc. When you write from your own experience, obviously you tend to write more naturally. But if you are in an exam and can't think of any experience, just invent one. No one is ever going to give you a lie detector test at the end of the exam. Examiners want a personal experience, just give them one. In the third paragraph, the candidate usually gives the other side of the argument, saying why she perfectly understands why some people feel that way. You should also notice that the second and third paragraphs both begin with interesting forms. The most effective solution would be, and I can completely understand why. All this is combined with really varied vocabulary throughout the text. For example, we could say undeniably, then as ridiculous as suggesting, then equally banning. All of this is fantastic for an examiner. Then the conclusion begins beautifully. So in a perfect world. And then again, it is a mixture of second conditionals with some interesting links, such as much as. And then she finishes with a short but simple sentence that gives great contrasts to all the complexity of the rest of the paragraph, which is bicycles are here to stay. Isn't this lovely? So I could go on and on about the content of this essay, but I think you've got the idea. So to sum up, we could say, no need for the texts to be too long, have few ideas, but spend adequate time using difficult forms, and please say yourself beforehand, I'm going to use notes in my essay as a rhetorical question, okay? And find a way to make them fit into your text. If you want to get a 7 and above score, you really have to pull out the big guns when it comes to grammar. So, if you have any questions, please save them until Kate speaks. And here she is now to talk about the speaking paper. Thanks for your attention, and Kate, over to you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll just turn off my video. And, okay, so I'm sorry about any difficulty with hearing us today, but we're contacting you from a long way away, and we're in Europe, and I think everyone in the world is online at the moment. So bandwidth is a precious thing. But I hope that you can you hear me? Or would you like the video?
It's all right. I think we can hear you very clearly. So I think it's all right if you can just carry on with it.
All right.
Yes.
So I'm just putting my notes up in front of the camera here so I can't see myself as well. All right. So today I'm going to be speaking about the speaking exam. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. It is one candidate and the examiner. So it's not two people going in. So it's more relaxing, just you being by yourself. So the IELTS exam is fantastic like that. And it's only about 11 to 14 minutes long. And it's in 3 parts. The first one goes for about 4 or 5 minutes. And the examiner just asks you what seem like very simple questions on everyday subjects. And part 2 is where you give a talk with a card that the examiner gives you with some questions on it. And you have about a minute to prepare for that. And then you give a 2-minute talk on that. We'll look at the card in a second. And then part 3 is about 4 or 5 minutes talking about the same topic from the card in part 2. And it uses more abstract ideas and issues. And it's probably a bit more difficult in the sense, because it's abstract, you have to come up with some more difficult grammar forms, like conditionals and things like that, because you're talking about things that aren't actual. But when I was asked to do this talk today, I asked about what people are mainly concerned about with their speaking in India. And a lot of people said it was concerns about accent. And I had to laugh because I have an accent myself. I have an Australian accent. And I thought, well, everyone has an accent, so that's not really a problem. Particularly, well, maybe Jacopo has a problem because he has a foreign accent because he's Italian. But Indians don't have a foreign accent. They have an Indian English accent, which is completely acceptable. And it's not a problem. You wouldn't be marked down because you had an Indian accent in an exam. The only problem might be is if the examiner can't understand what you're saying. And that's not an accent problem so much, that's a pronunciation problem probably. In any case, I suggest what you can do is take yourself, listen to yourself, listen to how you answer typical questions. And you can pick up on where you're going wrong. Maybe you might have problems between the V and the W, or the D and the T, or the word stress might be a problem. Get other people to listen to your recordings as well. It takes a bit of time to do it, but it's worth doing it. You might be surprised at how you sound. But anyway, as far as the Indian accent is concerned, if you wanted to not have an Indian accent anymore, don't go to an English teacher. You need to go to, I don't know, a dialect coach or something, like a Hollywood actor. So you should focus on things that you can control. And those 2 things, I suppose, are, oh, my notes just dropped. Number one, body language and how you represent yourself physically and how you speak. And the other one is the actual language we use. So if we look at body language, do not underestimate that. As an examiner myself, when a candidate walks into the room, shoulders back, smiling, even if they're terrified, I immediately get the feeling that they're confident. And I just imagine that their English is possibly even much better than it is. It's just something that passes on. But also, if you smile, it can have an amazing effect on you physically. It can increase your endorphins, your serotonin, your dopamine, all those lovely hormones. It lowers your heart rate and your blood pressure and relaxes your body. That's just by smiling. Even if it's a fake smile, it has this effect. Or what I suggest, and actually what I did just before this, is spend 2 minutes before you go into the exam doing the Superman pose, which is stand with your feet apart and your hands on your hips and look up, just like Superman does. Hold it for 2 minutes. This has been tested. I don't know who the scientists were that tested it, but it reduces your cortisol and increases your testosterone and makes you more confident and makes you into an alpha person for a certain period of time. And you only need it for 15 minutes, so it's probably enough. So that's my suggestion anyway. And the most important thing with the body language, once you have sat down, is to get eye contact. I'm sorry, I'm not getting very good eye contact at the moment because I keep looking at my notes. I'm not cross-eyed or anything. But keep looking at the examiner. Don't look away or you seem, I don't know, untrustworthy or unsure. But getting that direct eye contact is very, very important. Keep your hands away from your face. It stops them from understanding you as well. And smile. It has great power and it'll give you all those endorphins and things that you need, as well as making you look more confident. Okay, body language over, but do not underestimate it. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's worth about 20% of your mark, maybe even more. So if you're confident, you've got it. Don't worry about your accent. Make sure you smile. So now we can go on to another thing that you can control, which is the actual language you use. Jacopo, could you put us onto the part 1 questions on the screen, please?
Sure.
So here is, from our upcoming book, the typical part 1 questions that you have. Now, you can see here, there's broken in the first section into work and study. Now, what the examiner does, they ask you if you work or you study, and then move on to those questions. And it's a pretty high probability that you'll get those work and study questions, but you may not. It may be on another topic. For example, like the ones below, which are transport and television. But you will definitely be getting a group of 3 types of questions. So you need to be studying all those different types of questions that you're going to be getting. And it's the TV, the books, the transport, the people, the place, your home, your hometown. You can find the lists online. The important thing is to be ready for these kind of questions. Now, these questions seem pretty easy. They ask you, why did you choose your job? Or what do you like about your job? Or what do you study? And of course, you're not going to answer yes or no to these or say, I study medicine. You're going to expand on it a little, but it's probably not enough. These type of questions lull you into a feeling of relaxing because it feels more like a conversation. And you expect, like in a natural conversation, to give a short answer back, for the examiner to ask you another question on the same subject, but it's not going to happen. You have to go into a monologue. So they ask you this short little question and you have to give quite an extended answer until they stop you. Now, when they stop you, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It probably means you've done the right thing and they need to move on to the next question. So, for example, they'll ask you 3 or 4 of these selected sentences. The examiner will actually have a list like this in front of them, which of course you can't see, and they'll just select 3 or 4. If they ask you 6 or 7, you know your answers aren't long enough. So they seem like easy questions, but it's not a warm-up, okay? And you shouldn't probably repeat the question in the answer. So, for example, let's talk about transport. What do you think is the most convenient form of transport? And instead of saying, I think the most convenient form of transport is, it's better to start with something a little bit different, like, I always catch the train. It's not that convenient because it's often late, but it's the only option I have. So you're mixing it up a little bit and it makes it sound a little more natural. And then you can go on and talk about other forms of transport until you get stopped. The important thing is to keep talking. It's a monologue, not a conversation. Now, when they ask you about things you like, so what have we got here? What do you like about your job, for example? Now, instead of just repeating the word like, make sure that you have some synonyms on hand. You know you're going to be asked about what things you like, no matter what the topic is. So have the alternatives. I love, I'm keen on, I'm fond of, I adore, I'm mad about, I get excited about, all those kind of things. And try to avoid saying nice and good. Use some extreme adjectives like fabulous, wonderful, fantastic. You have to like boost, show as much vocabulary as you know. It might seem exaggerated, but really you're acting when you're in an exam. And it's a completely unnatural situation and you have to kind of pretend it is natural. But it's good to give a little bit extra at the beginning of a sentence as well. Like if someone says, what kind of music do you like? And you could start with, instead of saying, I like hip hop, you could say, like most people my age, I like hip hop, or like most people my age, I'm mad about hip hop. You can add things like that. And you can have these beginning statements ready, even if you don't know what the topic is. You can start with things like, oh, it might seem a bit strange, but I love country music, or I have to admit, I'm not really very into music, or like all people, I love music. So just adding that little bit extra. Now, if it's negative, you can do the same with, instead of saying I don't like, you can have I hate, I abhor, I can't stand, those kind of expressions. Now, if they ask you the childhood question, what's the childhood question in here? What transport did you use as a child? There's always one so they can get you talking using the past forms. Now, instead of saying when I was a child, it's better, this is where you can show off your knowledge of used to or would. So, what is it, what transport? I used to walk to school when I was a child. Or when I was a child, we would go on holiday by plane using those forms. So you're always trying to find some way of getting in your fancy acrobatic form. So to talk about that kind of habit in the past, remember, always try and get a used to in or a would. You can do it with any of the questions, actually. For example, what are your working hours, might be the question. And you can say, well, I used to work 9 to 5, but since I've had a child, I'm only working part-time now. Don't give lists when they ask you things because it's a waste of time. So for example, what don't you like about your studies? So don't say, I don't like maths, I don't like this, I don't like this. Just focus on one thing and then say why. or if it's a thing you like. What is a good idea also is, to talk about in that list of subjects you don't like, it might also be a list of places that you've visited. What countries have you visited? And you could say, oh, well, I've been to quite a few, but the most interesting place I've visited, using a nice superlative, is blah, 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 blah. And then you can just focus on one. And if you learn about a place, you can learn some extra details to talk about a place. So if you might decide on learning about a city that you've been to and describe what you saw in that city, etc., and you can add that to your long monologue. So, and then you can use great vocabulary, like, for example, the most interesting place I visited is London, because it's a fantastic international city, and the museums are outstanding, and I just adored walking over the bridge across the Thames and blah, blah, blah. You can just use the words that you choose because you've actually chosen that subject. I can't think of anything immediately because I haven't planned in advance. But if you plan a bit in advance, you can. Often there's a question about your hometown, so be ready to talk about that. You may be asked to describe people or people, places, activities. Be ready with enough vocabulary on that. Also, starting with cleft sentences is very good. And you just think, what's a cleft sentence? It's starting with putting the sentence backwards. So, for example, what struck me the most about blah, blah, blah was, or what impressed me so much, or what stands out for me, or in the negative, the things that annoys me about learning maths is having to remember all those, lists of numbers. I've never studied maths much. Or a thing I can't stand, or a thing that worries me, the thing. So starting with what or starting with the thing it's a bit of a different form, instead of starting with I all the time, which is a bit self-focused. Just let me turn my notes around. Is everyone hearing me properly? Yes, good, okay.
Yes,
now,
yes.
Okay, good. All right, now, the big things that you really need to use when you're speaking are the conditional forms. This is what is going to take you over to 7 and 8. It sounds pretty easy, but these things are much harder to make when you're speaking than when you're writing. They're absolutely expected of you in your writing, as Jacopo said before. But if you can pull out a wish or a conditional or an if only when they ask you a simple question, it's fantastic. For example, if they said to you, do you play a musical instrument? Now, if you don't, you lose that question. Like, you just say, no, I don't, because I never had a chance to learn. But you could say, I wish I could. It would be just fantastic to be able to play a song on the piano without thinking. Or if only I could play the piano, it would make me so happy, or something like that. So these are forms that you really need to be able to use quite easily. So what you can do to help you in the exam, think about I wish, and the 3 forms of I wish. Starting sentences with if will push you into a conditional question, of course. So just have ready in your head, if I could, if I had only, for the 3rd conditional. Seriously, if you came up with a 3rd conditional in the speaking, you're cooking on gas. It would be just fantastic. So, for example, if I had only learnt the piano, I could be working as a musician now, or something like that. Would be absolutely marvelous. Now, with the vocabulary, also what you use is important. Try and throw in extreme adjectives, because they're really powerful and they make you sound more emotionally involved. So for example, instead of saying small, tiny, big would be huge or enormous, scary, terrifying, good, wonderful, clean, spotless, opposite of that, filthy. They just sound so much more powerful. The day was freezing. The dress was gorgeous, fantastic, really useful to use them. And they're so easy to throw in because you need adjectives all the time. So you may as well use good descriptive adjectives. Remember about towns, people, places, journeys, books, TV programs. Try to get together a little bit of vocabulary on each of these topics that you can just pull out when you need them. Words like breathtaking, mind-blowing, awesome, all these are really fantastic. And and coming from someone with an accent, they just sound even better. They really sound like you know what you're talking about. Okay, Jacopo, can we move to the next part of the paper, please? Thank you. Okay, now this is where the examiner gives you a card and says, here's a card, look at it for 1 minute. You can actually take notes while you're doing this, and then you have 2 minutes to speak about it. Now this panics people a little bit, but it's just like being asked questions, really, and you have time to prepare for it. So the example here is describe a song that you really like, and then the way you need to answer it is what the song is, when you first heard it, how often you listen to it, and explain why you enjoy listening to it. Now, you think that's a lot of material, but you can virtually answer the first 3 questions in 1 sentence. Do not do this. It's very dangerous because then you have to spend 2 minutes talking about why you enjoy listening to it. And that's pretty abstract. So that's a bit more difficult to talk about. So instead of saying, my song that I really like is Lady Gaga's Shallow. I first heard it last year and I listen to it every day. Well, you've blown it then. So what you have to do is stretch it out a little bit. So you throw on one of those cleft sentences and you say, I'll do this first. So it might seem strange, but I really like the Christmas song Silent Night because I like to feel like it's Christmas every day. And then you say, what strikes me about the song is that whenever I hear it, it makes me feel, oh no, we don't need to do, no, that's not on the list. It makes me feel as though people are giving me gifts and I'm on holidays and I'm about to eat delicious food. And then when you talk about when you first heard it, then you can try to do some fancy past things like, the first time I heard this song, I was probably about 3 years old, and I would have heard my family singing it because it's something that was always sung, going back even further, at church when my parents would go on Christmas Eve and take us. I might have heard it even before that on television, but I don't know. It's something that I can always remember hearing. So you've stretched that one out. You can practice doing these by getting lists of these cards by either buying our book or you can see them online. They have them, you can see examples of them and just practice stretching out those sentences, trying to throw in a conditional, putting in a wish, So how often you listen to it, that would be in the present, but you can twist it around by putting in something like, I would listen to it more often if I could, but I don't have a recording of it, or something like that. Then when you explain why you enjoy listening to it, again, That's rather than repeating, I enjoy listening to it, because you can go back to these earlier, like, keen on, fond of, mad about words, and then elaborate. Now, all those things I said to you about Silent Night just then are all completely untrue. I invented them. I was panicking. I don't listen to music very much, and I couldn't think of a song, and that was the first one that came into my head. And so all those emotions that I talked about were also not true. And, I suppose they are. It's a very beautiful song. But I don't know when I first heard it, etc. But as Jacopo said before, they don't give you a lie detector test when you leave the exam. You can say what you want. As long as you answer the question, they don't care if you're telling the truth or not. Excuse me. Oh, I wish this self-isolating thing is difficult. I don't have someone to bring me a glass of water. Hang on a sec. I think I've got a bit of coffee here. I should have had that ready. Okay, fine. So then, after you finish your 2 minutes, now you don't have to worry about the timing. They'll bring you to a stop. If they stop you, don't panic. There's nothing wrong. If it's too short, they won't go silent, but they'll ask you probably the rounding off questions. Now, I can't see what the rounding off questions are on my screen. I can see, do you like singing this song yourself? Now, this is where you can actually laugh at yourself, that you're a terrible singer, say things like that, and lighten the moment. Can someone in chat put up for me what the next line is after do you like singing this song yourself? Can anyone else see it? Who's a fast typist? Go. Oh, you're not very fast. Oh, great. How does the song make you feel? Great. Okay. So again, you're always going to be asked, how does it make you feel? Now, this is where you need your mood words, okay? Frustrated, enraged, calm, peaceful, glad, elated. You need to make a list of all these kind of words and be able to remember them, instead of saying, it makes me happy, okay? If you want to say happy, instead of saying it makes me happy, exaggerate it a bit. The overwhelming feeling I had was of happiness, or something like that. But you need to have these words. They're going to also ask you about people, so you need words about personality as well. If somebody is friendly, engaging, over the top, fun, you need to be able to talk about people and explain why. What else? I'm just looking here. Okay, so you want, I haven't mentioned the modals. Yeah, try and get as many modals in as you can. Now, the best way of thinking about modals is to think, when do I use modals? So you've got your modals of obligation, have to, must, should, etc. And then you can throw them in if they're asking about, if you want to, you can, remember, you can control it because it's a monologue. So if they ask you a question like, even on here, do you like singing this song yourself? I only sing when I have to, or I suppose I should sing more often to practice, but I'm embarrassed to do it in front of people. You can throw that modal in there. And the conditionals, second conditional, if I had a better voice, I would sing more often. Or if I hadn't had a bad experience with karaoke, I would be able to sing better. A nice third conditional. Thank you very much, Denish. But remember, your superpower in the speaking is the third conditional. If you can do that, you've got it made. And it really is like a mathematical formula. So you just remember it's if plus the past perfect plus would. What is it? If I had remembered the rule for the third conditional, I would be able to say it now. So would plus be, I would have been able to see it. Sorry, would plus have plus been plus the past participle. I beg your pardon. So it's easy for me to make it because I don't have to think. But so just think of it as, I know all you Indians are very good at maths. So if you think of it as mathematical like that, then practice making them at home. Just you're sitting in front of a glass and you think, if this glass had had beer in it, I would have drunk it by now, or something like that. So you can just practice making them, and then practice making them in the negative. If I hadn't eaten so much pizza at lunchtime, I wouldn't be falling oh no, that's now. I wouldn't have fallen asleep straight after lunch. Sorry, I tend to use mixed conditionals more than I do a pure third. So if you want to, using the mixed conditionals, talking about your current situation in the second part, is with would plus the infinitive. Okay, so sorry. But what you do is just get practiced at making them, because once you stick one of those in there in your speaking, they can't give you under a 7 for speaking because they'll be so impressed. All right, now when you move on to the third part, can we have the third part, Jacopo, please? Jacopo? He's fallen asleep. Oh, good, thank you, thank you. So then the third part is questions about the same topic. So here it's questions on music. Now, again, don't feel like it's a conversation. It's a completely unnatural situation. They ask you unnatural questions, like who asks you, why did you enjoy it? How did it make you feel in real life? So these can really put you off, because in your normal English speaking, which you speak perfectly fine and perfectly normally, you don't get asked questions like this, so you don't get practice. So in some ways, it doesn't really test real English, but we have to overlook that. There's nothing that can be done. You have to answer these kind of questions, or why do you remember it? Nobody asks you those kind of inquisitive questions. So you have to be prepared. Be prepared to answer these vague, abstract questions. So if it's, sorry, I'm still talking about part 2. So if it's like, how did it make you feel? It made me happy because is completely fine, but it would be better to say it in a bit more of a fancy way, like I said before. So again, back to the third conditional. So if they say, how do you feel about a teacher you've had? And you could say, my favorite teacher was Mrs. Simpson in the 3rd grade. If I hadn't had Mrs. Simpson as my teacher, I would never have learned to speak French or something, because she was my French teacher. But you have to just practice with that third conditional. I can't tell you more strongly how important it is. Also, using linkers is just as important in your speaking as it is in your essay writing. Now, Jacopo was saying before how to put in more formal types of linkers. You don't have to make them so formal when you're speaking, but you start off with things like personally speaking, however, in spite of, on the one hand. But remember, when you use on the one hand, you have to get to on the other hand, or else they'll be waiting for the on the other hand. And because these are quite long answers, to show that you're building a long answer, you start with firstly, then secondly, finally. What can we do here? Do you think everyone should study a musical instrument? Okay, let's do that with firstly, secondly, finally. So, firstly, I think it's important for people to study a musical instrument because it teaches them something that's a bit different in their everyday life and uses another part of their brain. Secondly, it can be quite useful in their social life in years to come. And I'm shortening it so I can fit them all in. And finally, it's possibly something that they can make money out of if they make a career in music. What else have we got here? What do you think of the music talent shows that are on television? Now, on this one, sorry, what do you think of the music talent shows are on the fourth one down? You could answer with two sides to it. You could say, well, and then start with one of these lines that you begin with. Personally speaking, I actually quite enjoy them because you really get to see extremely talented people. And if those people hadn't had the opportunity of going on a show like that, I never would have been able to see them. But I can understand why some people might find them boring because they're quite repetitive and it's always the same show for years, etc. So those questions will go for 4 to 5 minutes. So there's 6 questions there. The examiner only has 6 questions in front of them. If you answer them too shortly, they can only ask you why or why not. They can't come in with more questions asking for more detail because they're not allowed to. They're on a script that they have to stick to just to keep everything very fair. So they have to then ask you the next question. Now, they've only got 6 questions there, so you really do need to answer each one in at least using 1 minute. So remember, just keep going on your monologue until they hold up their hand and stop you and ask you another thing. Just keep going. You will not be penalized if they ask you to be quiet and give you another question. Okay. I think that's about all I have. I think we can probably go to questions now. I've gone on a bit, I'm sorry. But I think that's it. The exam just ends with them saying, that's the end of the test. Thank you very much. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Kate. Thank you so much. Okay. Hi. Yeah. Can we move on to questions? I have a few questions which I got from the chat bar, and I'd like to read out some of them, and then maybe you can answer them.
I hope they're not too difficult.
Let's see. The first question is, I think, for Jacopo from Somi Sarkar. The question is, hello, how do I improve the use of idiomatic expressions for task 2?
Okay, great. So thanks, Somi, for the
Can I just quickly come in with an answer to this one? As an examiner, just with the idiomatic forms, only use them if you would use them in real life. If I say to somebody, do you like football? And they say, football is not my cup of tea. I know they do not say that in real life because English people don't even say that anymore. I don't know if you still say that in India, I'm not sure. I know we don't in Australia. So please be careful with them because they can sound very unnatural unless you are so sure of using them. You don't need to use them, I don't think, in an IELTS exam if you don't feel comfortable with them. So who was it who asked that question? I'm sorry.
Somi.
Oh, Somi. So Somi, if you're worried about them, don't use them. If the best way to use them is choose 4 or 5 of them, learn them really well, and use them in your real English, at least for 6 months before you do the exam. But I wouldn't be even using them that much in the written part. Sorry,
a piece of advice I would give to Sumi, no, don't worry. Another piece of advice I would give to Sumi is that a good way to learn idiomatic expressions and to learn phrasal verbs is to note them down somewhere together with an explanation of the meaning. So do not translate them in your language. Note them down, explaining the meaning together with that sentence in which you use them. Okay? So this is a good way you could try to learn idioms and phrasals. Okay? So in one column you put the idiom, in another one you put the meaning in English, Another one, an example. Taken, for example, from a text, from an article, from a book, from whatever you want.
And another good way to practice the phrasal verbs is to try to do multiple phrasal verbs in like 6 sentences in a story. That's a really good exercise. And with phrasal verbs, it doesn't matter how many of them you use in a sentence. It doesn't sound strange. Idioms, you should only use 1 or 2 when you're speaking. But phrasal verbs, you can go bananas and just use hundreds of them. While you can use 3 in a sentence and it doesn't sound strange.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. No, so the next question is from a teacher. It's from Sabita Francis. She is saying that most of my students cannot use linkers in writing. So can you give some advice to her about that?
Well, I think you should insist that they do. You could work on, you could give them material that doesn't have linkers in it and get them to put the links in.
Yeah, another thing you could do is, another way you could use is to try to have a set of linkers, okay, to write them somewhere, and then ask your students to speculate on why you would use one linker or the other. Ask the student to motivate their answer, okay? So this could be another way to help them practice this, okay? What do you think?
What do you mean by motivate your answer? Like justify it?
So your student, yeah, exactly, justify it, exactly. So you have some linkers, okay? You ask students in, the situation, the part of the paragraph in which you would use that linker, and justify their answer and probably provide an example.
Okay. Getting them to use them in speaking is quite good. Exactly. Try drilling them with them.
Right.
Build sentences together and put them in and drill them, which is like getting them just to repeat them as a group. That really works. Goes into their head.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Sorry. Can I move on?
Yes.
Yes. So another question from Somi is that this is to you, Kate. I wanted to ask this. Is it preferable to use starters like well or frankly in your speaking test?
Absolutely. Yes, use them in the speaking at all. You can use, frankly is probably better than well. Well tends to be a little bit of a filler, and I use it a lot, I know myself. But you could think of other ones like, starting with absolutely is always very nice.
Yeah.
Actually, it could be an actually.
Okay.
Frankly, yes, all of them are good because it gives you time to think as well. As long as you don't use fillers from a different language, or to start sentence starters from a different language.
Exactly.
Okay, and
and remember from my own experience, that this was a good way, to allow yourself some time to think and to construct your answer before answering to the examiner. This comes from my direct experience as a candidate. Yeah.
Right.
But if you do say frankly, make sure you say something frank after it.
Of course. Okay, and also another question is equal weightage to be given to all the questions in speaking?
I think so.
Kate.
I'm not sure.
I can answer this question if you like, Kate.
Please.
I can follow up on this question if you want. Yeah, okay. The assessment of the speaking component is quite different from the assessment of the writing one. In the writing one, the first part and the second part have different, weights. Part 2 is worth double, has double weight with respect to part 1, okay? In speaking, you just get directly for each part of the test. So you're not getting a score for each question you answer. You're going to be evaluated in each part of the test. in a balanced score from 0 to 9.
Yes, sorry, that makes sense. I realize that now. I do mark speaking exams myself. It's on the whole test, of course. Yes.
Yes, on the whole test. Kate. Yeah. We need
it's not broken up.
Refresh session, I think. We need a refresh session at some stage.
Don't underestimate the importance of the first group of questions. They're not warm up for the rest of the test. They're just as important. Yes.
Okay, there's a question which a lot of people have asked, and I think Hindu Rajashri Arimili has also asked this, and a lot of people have asked this. How can we improve our vocabulary, both for writing as well as speaking?
Do you know, my greatest piece of advice I can give you is Netflix. All of my top students always watch a lot of British and American shows on Netflix with English subtitles. And those, or eventually without them, those are my top students. And I always say, do you watch Netflix? And all of them, with no exception, have always said yes. That's the best way to improve your vocabulary, is to stick the subtitles on in English so that you can see the actual words that you don't recognize and you will remember them. I'm sure there are. I mean, of course, there are other ways. Reading is a great way.
Exactly.
How did you do it,
Jacopo? For the writing component, for the writing component, in fact, I would suggest people to read newspapers, books, and this is the best way to understand, how sentences can be, constructed in the best way. Because as far as the speaking part is concerned, listening to people speaking English is always a good idea. But for the writing component, I strongly advise everyone to read. And read whatever you want, online, blogs, newspapers, research papers if you are a college student, because each and every of these different literary genres teaches you a different approach to the language itself, And since the tasks you will find in the IELTS exam could be taken from newspaper articles, research papers, the more you read, the more you are used to those texts. So, I think, and for Netflix is go for Netflix, definitely.
Okay, I have a question from Ravina, and she is asking about the writing part. We have been given a word limit in the samples that we see in the books that we use. Is it okay if we cross the word limit while we're writing the answers?
Yeah, it's not a word limit. That's the amount you have to do. But, and you can go over that. Don't go under it. Don't go under it at all. You have to go over that limit. And but you don't need to write a hell of a lot more. Sorry, this is your area, Jacopo.
Yeah. No, but I mean, as we said, I understand the reason behind this question, because both Shamila's answer and Malika's answer were quite long. You remember, Shamila's answer was approximately 270 words long, while Malika's answer was 350 words long. Both of these candidates scored 8, would have scored 8 in a real exam. So their answer is good. But a piece of advice I would like to give you is this. For part 1, as soon as you have analyzed everything that is contained in the 2 graphs, stop it. Stop writing. Don't speculate. Don't add any more personal opinions, because you're not required to do that. Okay? So just write one simple answer which sums up all of your text, and that's it. For the second part, since it's an essay and you have to express your own opinion, just choose your point of view and develop it clearly, consistently, and logically. When you get to a logical conclusion, stop writing. Just ensure you wrote at least 150 words, and that's it. But it's not necessary to go over 250 words and 150. If you do, that's fine. But just ensure that you don't lose yourself in writing, because
Don't go
it's
under
highly, don't go under, but if you go over, that's good, but just try to ensure that you keep consistency throughout the text, because we all know that the longer the text is, more difficult it is to keep a logical flow in it. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And also,
sorry.
No, I was just saying, also, you don't want to annoy the examiner by having things there that are too long, unnecessarily long.
Okay, so this ties in with, and there's another question which is repeatedly being asked. And this is there for both writing as well as speaking. In writing, is it all right to use simple sentences? Is it important to use complex sentences? Does that get you more marks? Similarly, in speaking, is it okay to use very simple language? Or is it important to use maybe flowery language? Both in writing and speaking, is it important to use complex, flowery language? How far can you go with very simple language use?
You won't get a 7 if you use very simple language. And you know, people need a 7 to get to university.
The key word is grammar acrobatics. Okay, not even somewhere. You need to show how well you know grammar.
And a variety.
So second and third and a variety of adverbs, adjectives, linkers. So in this case, less is not more. Writing and speaking, less is not more. You need to be able to spray high-level grammar, functions, vocab, and etc. Obviously, if you attempt high-level grammar, vocab, etc., be sure you can use it properly. Right, Kate? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there is like a... Where have I got that note? Hang on. I made a note to myself, just talking on that topic to myself yesterday. So you have to make a choice between accuracy and range of your abilities. So of course, if you can't manage doing incredible grammatical acrobatics, don't do them, but don't go completely simple. If you speak perfectly correct English, very, very simply, it doesn't mean you're going to get a high mark because you're not making mistakes. A perfect test is not just mistake-free. It needs to be at a higher level as well. You have to be able to... Flowery, I don't know. I don't know what flowery means, because does that mean using old-fashioned words in an over-exaggerated way? Or are we talking about building, well, pompous, thank you. Yeah, there's no need to use pompous words, but you need to use words that are more expressive and a bit more different. Remember, it's not a natural situation. You're there showing off what you have. And you're on display, it's like acting. It's not real English, but this is the way that they test it. So, and that's the way you get high marks. I don't necessarily think it's the right way, but that's the situation. So,
yeah.
Okay, there's another question about how to tackle the question paper. So this is from Namra Rizvi, who is asking, is it okay to answer the long questions first and then go back to the shorter questions and work on them? Is it okay to do, like, go from long to short, or should we go from short to long?
Okay, my personal piece of advice is this: prepare and write down an outline, okay, for both tasks. So familiarize yourself with the tasks first, and I would suggest you to start with the task you think you could prepare and write in less time. But obviously, since the second task, it's the one which carries double the marks, I strongly advise you to dedicate most of the time to it. Because while in the first task, you're asked to sum up data containing some graphs. In the second task, you're asked to express yourself. So to express your idea, your opinion, logically and consistently. So you need to reflect a lot. I would suggest you start with the one you think you can, write in a short amount of time. Always remember you need to dedicate more time to the second task, because it wastes more.
Double the time.
This is my piece of advice. But always double the time. But always remember that if you're doing a paper-based exam, you have to write your answer on the separate answer sheet within 1 hour. You won't have extra time to do this, okay? So within 1 hour, you need to plan, write, and move from rough copy to the separate answer sheet.
Right. Okay. We have 2 questions from Ashok Bhui. He is asking, hello, sir and ma'am. I have a question about mistakes. After how many mistakes do they cut one entire band? And the other question is, how many mistakes are allowed in the writing tasks?
Okay. I'll answer the question for the writing first. It's not maths, let's say. Okay.
They don't go through and count your mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we have to mark papers, we just we have some descriptors. Okay, some band descriptors. Let's say a candidate is a band 9 if he meets the following requirements overall. So we tend to evaluate the paper a whole, let's say. So what we do is just basically we make reference to some questions like these ones when marking papers. So in task 1, we want, are all parts of the prompt assessed?
Addressed.
Does the summarize what the 2 page address, are measuring? Have the main features of the pie charts been reported? Have relevant comparisons been made? So we just wonder, we ask ourselves a series of rhetorical questions. Okay. We try to answer them, and then we come up with a mark, with a band descriptor. Go on, Kate.
But that band is broken into those 4 areas. So you get marked on those areas. So the task response is, have you answered the question properly? Coherence and cohesion is, are you using linkers? Have you set it out in decent paragraphs? That's half the mark. So the linkers are very important. Lexical resource, your vocabulary. And then the grammar is what you use grammatically, another 25%. So they're not going through taking off marks for grammatical mistakes. They're looking at it in terms of those 4 sections, and they all have equal balance in the marking.
Yeah, 4 macro areas, let's say, okay? We don't, stay there and, underlining in red, blue, all the mistakes, and, just saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We tend to evaluate each and every section, based on these descriptors.
So don't wake up screaming in the night because you've left the S off a third person, It's not going to make that much of a difference, but it will stop you from getting a top score. It should be, when I say it needs to be almost completely correct, maybe 1 or 2 little mistakes, but mistakes, some of them are bigger than others. Some of them are basically just writing mistakes. If a person who's obviously an excellent student leaves an S off a third person, it's because they haven't read through it and checked at the end, not because they don't know the rule.
Okay.
Sorry, Shreyas, this one question I've been constantly getting in the private chat. So, Kate, since this is about speaking, could one get judged because of their accent? So what the person means here is that would a European or an English accent would get them better marks compared to the other accents?
In the exam?
Yeah.
In the exam, okay. I mentioned this at the beginning. Maybe you couldn't hear me at the time. But an Indian accent is it's just a different form of English. It's not even a foreign accent anymore. It's considered Indian English. So they can certainly not mark you down. The only time when you would get marked down is if you're not pronouncing things correctly and people can't understand you. So it's only when it's a case of not being able to be understood that you're marked down. Now, any IELTS examiner in India is completely used to hearing an Indian accent. And so they would never mark you down for an accent. So do not worry about that at all. Indian accent is beautiful. It's more than accepted. It's something that exists. There are more people speaking English with an Indian accent than any other English speakers in the world. So be proud of it. Yeah? Go for it. You won't get marked down.
That's great to hear. Another question which I can see repeatedly, which I think I would like to answer. A lot of people are asking if you have any material that they can refer to, any content. And I would like to tell everyone that Jacopo and Kate are writing a series of IELTS books for Oxford University Press India, which will be in the market soon, and especially the e-books will be there, because as we all know, it's difficult to get hold of print books now at this time. And we will also have e-resources, free resources, which are all connected to their series of books. It's called Perfect IELTS. And please look at our Facebook for more information, and we'll keep sharing information with you. Now, another question is is there a difference between, what are the differences between the paper IELTS test and the computer-based, the online IELTS test?
Of course, the speaking test is the same for both. You have to present to a real person. The speaking test is not online. Are you on top of that one, Jacopo, with your incredible memory?
Yeah, question. Okay. Yeah. The computer-based test has been launched a couple of months ago by IELTS, and the first difference is that you get the results in less time. Okay, usually the IELTS results are available 13 days after the exam itself. In the case, I think approximately 10 days, probably. The second thing is that the content of the exam is the same. Same number of questions, the same number of papers, the same. Yeah. You just type everything in a computer. So you type your writing answer in a box instead of writing it. And obviously you don't have an answer sheet, so you don't have to copy your answers from the question paper sheet.
I think they're drop down answers.
As far as everything is concerned, as far as I can remember from my own experience, just click on a box, basically.
Oh, okay.
It's interactive. It's like getting an interactive question paper, you know. And the exam experience is the same, and the speaking is still with an examiner. So it's still a face-to-face exam with a certified examiner. So
maybe
it's not recorded like in other exams.
Maybe the listening is better because you get to do it with headphones rather than listening to some CD. So it might be a bit clearer.
Well, you might get you may be able to do the exam with headphones also in a center if the center has enough headphones. So it depends. Based on my experience, it depends. But for sure, you get the result in less time.
Right. We have a lot of questions, and I think we will wrap this up now because it's been half an hour. I know there are lots of questions
Yeah.
which are still unanswered. I'm very sorry about that. But if you go to our Facebook page, you can put up your questions there. We
Yeah.
have, yeah, and we've also shared an email ID in the registration email that we have sent you, which is edumktg@oup.com. You can send in your questions there too, and we will make sure that your questions reach the presenters. But for now, we will have to wrap up. Thank
Okay.
you so much,
Just
Jacopo and
one
Kate.
last thing. Just one last
Yes.
thing. A take-home message before you go. Remember that strategy is king, that the extraordinary is not impossible, and there's nothing to fear but fear itself. So thanks for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.